Good afternoon. We are so excited that you're joining us today, or for that matter, joining us next week as this continues to be on our website in an episode as we take you inside the renovation happening at Jacobs Music Center. Just seeing that incredible video makes me excited as to the progress and the anticipation of the opening in the fall, in November. So today we've talked in previous recordings. We've talked about the acoustics and the seating configurations, but today we want to take you to the absolute essence of the experience. Namely, we're going to start with the sound and sound capabilities, including everything from amplified sound to possible virtual capture and so forth. And so we want to start with that. And then we're going to look a little bit more deeply into the lighting of the hall. What you see influences how you hear the music. And so we're very excited about both of these topics. I'm joined today by Travis Wininger, who is our VP for Facilities and who is at the center, the epicenter of this project, as he was on the project for the Radio Shell at Jacobs Park. And Joel Watts is with us today. He's our incredibly talented head of sound technology, sound engineer. He creates that incredible acoustically natural but amplified sound at the Radio Shell at Jacobs Park. He's worked here, of course, at Jacobs Music Center before we went into pandemic, but importantly, he has a lot of great new equipment, I would say, tools that he can't wait to install and be ready to use to capture the sound of our orchestra in their new hall. So Joel, let's start with you. First of all, welcome.
Well, thank you.
And brilliant work last weekend, just this past weekend, on
Thanks.
A really complex program. The orchestra sounded fantastic. They performed great, and the sound in my seat on both nights was terrific. Plus we had chorus and we had singers, soloists. It's complex, your work. So before we get into JMC, first of all, congratulations. And
no, thank you.
Maybe just a couple of sentences about your journey over the past now 2.5 seasons outdoors.
Yeah, so, it's interesting, we've been outdoors this entire time, and most of my job has been amplification. And we've been doing something that we won't do as much or as frequent with the Masterwork series about, amplifying classical music, which is kind of it's not something we need to do in a hall, in a beautifully designed hall. It does it by itself, and the hall can speak to itself. So doing it outdoors has been a complex thing to really make you feel like you're not hearing the speakers and you're just hearing the sound kind of coming at you, like you're in a hall almost. And so we've been able to kind of mess around with mic techniques and some help from our audio consultant, Sean Murphy, kind of figure out exactly how to portray what Raphael is doing on the podium out to the audience. That's always what I'm doing, is enhancing that. I'm not creating that. So, whatever the musicians do is heard by the audience and stuff like that. So it's kind of a recording background sort of thing there. And that's something that we're hopefully going to do in JMC and stuff. But some of the miking techniques we've used there have been interesting, and we'll use them similarly in the hall. Another interesting thing is with all these runouts that we've been doing, we've been recording all of those, and hearing the orchestra in all of the various halls in San Diego has been, it's not something that every audio engineer gets to do. Go in a new hall and say, okay, where are we going to put the mics? How is this going to sound? It's an interesting thing to just, even hear the same piece by the same orchestra in the same weekend in multiple different halls, and how different it can really sound. It's very interesting.
Well, thank you for that. And it has been quite an interesting 2 seasons, and for the orchestra as well. I mean, they have to every acoustic in the same way you're adjusting to how they're performing and mic setup and so forth. So you must be pretty excited as you anticipate coming indoors to what Paul Scarborough is creating in terms of the acoustic of the hall. And to start with, you have an incredible recording studio that's been a critical part of the design.
Yeah, and that's kind of in early conversations, I kind of pushed a little hard, saying like, this is a really important space, and that's I used to work in Boston, and I was there when they redid their recording studio. They actually finished it right when I came, so I say that they did it for me, but they might disagree. But I kind of saw how much it transformed how the orchestra thought about recording, and how much of an important aspect of it is for an orchestra, especially for conductors and musicians and stuff like that. So we created, our architects and Paul created a really comfortable space for musicians to come in and listen, and for Raphael to come in and listen, in hopes to do a lot of projects, a lot of recordings or virtual things, or broadcasts, depending on what's in our future, and the ability to do that stuff. But what I saw in Boston, which I think is going to start to happen here, is that musicians really started to rely on it in terms of how they actually heard themselves. They would listen to it on their way home. They would, study from it, and kind of make it more of a two-way street in recording, and kind of use it as a tool, because, they're in a hall, they play something, and then it's done. They can't go out and sit in the hall. Sometimes their colleagues will, or they'll go between different pieces, but typically on like a big Mahler piece or something like that, they're all playing. They can't go experience the same thing in the hall. So that's kind of the biggest part of the recording studio, is making a comfortable space for them to come in and listen, and feel okay listening, and not feel self-conscious, and a nice, warm, inviting space. Then on top of that, for me, all the fun stuff is, we're putting in an Atmos system. It's a Dolby Atmos system. Some people have heard of it in like movie theaters and stuff like that. But basically what it is that you have speakers surrounding you, all on kind of a horizontal level, but also above you. And so, if you're in a movie theater, you have the helicopter come and flies over your head and stuff like that. But in a recording sense, what we get from stereo speakers, so two speakers in front of you or on headphones, is kind of, it's as if there's just sound coming straight from in front of you. But what Paul is doing, and what a good Hall acoustics is, you have all of these reflections, this reverb, this early reflections tail and stuff like that, and that really creates the sound that is makes it so much more beautiful, and kind of really creates it transports you. And so in recordings, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to transport you into as if you were in that hall, sitting in that chair, enjoying that concert. So you might have gone to the concert and had this crazy good experience, and then you could go home and also listen to it. Now look, we're never going to be as good as sitting in a hall. Hearing live music is totally different. There's a lot of psychoacoustic stuff and stuff like that, but just the ability to maybe do some recordings and some stuff like that, where you could feel like you're much more likely in a hall and stuff like that.
So what I'm hearing is that Paul is creating this really dynamic sound in the hall and we remember when we went back to when he was with us to talk about the acoustics, with sound that is going to be much richer and more complicated than what we had before. And certainly, if anybody saw the former recording studio, it was kind of a preservation of history of the recording industry. And perhaps, we just hadn't invested in it in the same way, obviously. We always had aspirations, but now we just have state-of-the-art equipment and setup. I'm already thinking how great it would be to offer special opportunity to sit in the recording booth some night and hear the sound there versus the sound in the hall. It sounds
I always find at orchestras, the recording studio becomes the most popular place to be, especially for management, because you can come in, enjoy this great sound, and you're not bothering the audience because you have to leave before the end of the piece and stuff like that. Check your phone if you need to. It can be a really exciting space, especially if we're doing a record and you have like a producer in there. Having that whole dynamic of watching, checking where things like we might need to redo a spot, or like, oh, this was better last night and stuff like that, is a really interesting aspect of being in the recording studio.
So when you talked about mic placement in the various rental halls that we've had in the last year, and when you obviously we are all going to be very excited when those sound panels are in and the back walls are complete and we actually start to hear the acoustic of the new hall. You can't, right now, you can't get a sense of it really, except that there's a lot of great reverberation and color to the sound, but nothing that we can hear as what the future sound will be.
Right.
So when the scaffolding is removed and the stage floor is in and the walls are in and the reflective panels are in, how do you make the decision at that point? Or are you already imagining where that mic placement is? How does it differ from Mahler's Second Symphony, which is opening the Jacob's Masterwork series versus the Rite of Spring? Does it change week to week? How does your imagination, how do you imagine that?
There's so many variables in recording. And so a way to kind of go about it is to funnel down what things have worked and how they worked in the past and kind of hone in on that sound. It's going to take a lot of concerts and a lot of time in the hall for the orchestra, just to get used to it also, and hearing them themselves and how they play in the hall. They'll be going through a kind of a transitional period, and as will I with mic placement. I kind of start with a typical Decca setup, which is what most orchestra engineers that I kind of know from who I've been taught by and kind of been mentored by. And so the basis of it, 80% of the sound, we say, are 3 mics above the conductor. And so they're the 3 most important mics because what they do is they capture the balance as if the conductor were hearing it. And so that is the most important thing to me because that's where Raphael can hear, and that's what Raphael wants to present out into the hall. And so those 3 mics above the conductor, there's like a nominal 10 feet that we always kind of start with, and then we'll move them up and down. We'll move them front to back depending on to capture the correct balance, the correct, amount of reverberation, the complexity of the sound. An interesting part of this space is that the orchestra will be playing different. We'll have to figure out where the mics are going to be, but there's also the tunable acoustics with all of the panels and stuff like that. So it's very different than the shell, but with a shell Meyer constellation system, it's kind of a similar thing where there's these 3 kind of tools to be played with. The orchestra is a tool with it, acoustics in the room is a tool with it, and then the mic placement is also a tool. And so to kind of have these all 3 kind of work in harmony to create the best, the vision of it. And I think Raphael will be part of that. And musicians in terms of that, because it's really, I have an idea of what I want the sound to be, but it's really their vision. And a lot of the first few weeks will just be me sitting in the hall listening, and kind of saying, and then going back to running back to the recording studio and say, does it sound like it is in the hall? Does it sound the way we want it to? What's good in the hall? What's not good in the hall? In this seat, what do I want to change? What do I, but the way Paul's designing the room, I don't think there'll be a bad seat in the house. So,
one of the things I'm excited about is releasing recordings of the orchestra, because many people, if they don't travel to San Diego, don't really know just how great this orchestra is. And so we're talking about recordings with Raphael. We obviously have issued 1 recording based on a live performance just before the pandemic shutdown, and that's the Shostakovich Symphony No. 11. But the process of making a recording over multiple live performances and then possibly a patch session if needed, but then it comes to you. And what are your next steps in terms of that?
Well, I think the interesting part of it is how much is involved during that process too. What I'm used to is, and we did this a little bit during COVID when we kind of did little kind of mini sessions, is a lot of listening with Raphael. Him listening back every night, saying what worked, what didn't work, what do we need, what's good, what's bad. And so by the end of it, I always like being part of these listening sessions because you really get to hear just the depth of artistry from the artist here. What the conductor says, what this part means to them, how it's supposed to be portrayed and stuff like that. I always found that to be the most interesting aspect of recording. at the end of the day. So what we've done, we'll record all the live concerts. If there's like a little thing that didn't kind of come out quite right, we'll do the patch session. But really capturing the energy of those live concerts. So what we do there is we piece these all together. And it's not, some people think like you're just putting band-aids on stuff and it's fake and not so good. I think it's more creating the best possible performance, because the conductor every night tries something a little different. If you hear Raphael on Friday and you hear him on Saturday, everything, he's changing a few different things, oh, that didn't work last night, or I want to try this, or this needs a different mood or something like that. So it's taking all of those kind of mood shifts and stuff like that, piecing them together musically, and creating what we call an edit. And so we're taking all of these various performances and making them into one, not a perfect edit, but kind of just one performance, that cohesive performance. And then there's a lot of sending back and forth with the conductor to make sure that they're happy with it. Typically how I'm used to it is that everything goes through me. I do a first pass, and once I'm happy, I send it along. It saves a lot of work on the conductor's time and stuff like that, so that they can focus more on the music and not, there was a wrong, the clarinet played an A instead of an A flat, I don't know, in measure 5. That should all kind of be taken care of and tidied up. After that point, we do what we call mixing, where we take all of the microphones on stage and, remembering that 80% of the sound are those 3 mics above the conductor, and kind of going through the piece and kind of changing the perspective. Because in a hall, our ears do something called the cocktail effect. So if you're at a party and someone's talking, what your ears do is that you hone in on that person and you actually make them louder and everyone else softer. And you're getting that from a bunch of different cues of reflections and stuff like that. And so when we have 2 speakers in front of us or 11 around us, we don't have as many reflections as we do in the hall. So that when you're sitting in the hall and you say, I was a horn player, I would always want to hear the horns a little louder. And they were always, loud to me, which was the right volume to me. But so kind of doing that for an audience in a way, and having things at the right moment, that you're focusing on the right aspects of the story. So you can always hear the entire story. So you can listen to, a million times and feel like you hear everything, but kind of bringing the listener along a musical journey in a way. So that's the mixing portion of it, which of course, because that's all balances and stuff like that. Very important to have the conductor involved in that. After that, we go to something called the mastering phase, which is, voodoo to most people. You have this perfectly mixed and edited thing, and you send it off to this person and you get it back and it sounds better. And what happened? And typically that person is kind of the final set of ears. We always like to have someone else do it. So we have, for Shostakovich, we use Tim Martin out in New York, and someone just to kind of say, oh, this is working, this isn't working, and kind of make it sound not similar to other records, but most definitely the volume to be the same, so that when you crank your Shostakovich record from Montreal and then you go to the San Diego Symphony, you're not sitting there and like turning it all the way up or all the way down and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of the whole process. And this process, sometimes we're given a week to do, and sometimes we're given 6 months to do. And so when it's a week, there's an army of people, and when it's 6 months, it's one person. And so it all kind of depends on when the release dates are, and kind of marketing and getting it out there.
Well, another aspect of it that I'm looking forward to is the possibility of returning to virtual, or being able to capture things virtually and either live stream or delayed, but not to people who, for whatever reason, can't hear us live. Maybe it's our local hospitals for patients. Maybe it's community centers or schools on a national basis, so that we can extend the San Diego Symphony Orchestra's sound and programming and artists more broadly. And we will have that capacity in the new hall as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that is that as we're recording live concerts, we're honing the sound in. And so our studio is actually designed to be able to do a live show with redundancies and stuff like that you would normally need. And we kind of have a video backbone. to be able to do some of that work if we wanted to. So we would be able to bring the San Diego Symphony kind of, anywhere, which is, during COVID, that was the only way to hear music. But now I think it's a great thing to be able to do both in certain aspects of it.
So turning to sound in one additional way, and that is those concerts that require amplification. What comes to mind quickly, of course, is we do a number of films, and probably will continue to do most of them outdoors because the ambience there and the audience size and so forth is so suited for it. But there will be other concerts, and you have been a key member of the design team for amplification in Jacobs Music Center, which will not be required for Jacobs Masterworks or symphonic programming whatsoever. People always say, well, is there electronic? No amplification for those, but where you have a film or where you have maybe a vocal artist, a popular artist. So talk to us a little bit about what you've designed in that.
I think an interesting place to start is actually what Paul did, and the tunable acoustics, the ability to bring in curtains around the stage for the musicians, the ability to take the reflectors up and all the way around the back to kind of create almost a more dead space. And so it'll be very different than the shell, because what we're doing is we are amplifying the orchestra in a room. So the room becomes part of the artistry and stuff like that. So the team that designed the speaker system had to keep all of this in mind. And so they're very specifically placed where it hits mostly just the audience, not like side walls and stuff like that, to not create more confusion and whatnot. So what we're putting in is an L-Acoustics K3 rig that will sound wonderful in that room. We could do a whole rock concert in there if we wanted to, or it's, finely tuned so that we could do a nice, like maybe a play with orchestra or something like that, where it's just a few actors who are amplified and whatnot. So it's kind of a really advanced system in that regard, and a really finely tuned system in that regard. We decided to do what we call an LCR, which are the 3 speakers across, because we do a lot of, the ability to do films. Typically with films, we have dialogue in the center, and then you can create the orchestra or any rhythm elements on the sides to kind of broaden because when you're in a hall, you hear all of this, the reflected sound, and sounds wide and, great and lush. And having our speakers in that configuration allows us to kind of recreate that and build upon that in a way. So we have an L-Acoustics, speaker system, and that's one of the most important parts of this system to me. Good speakers and good mics are kind of the 2 biggest things. After that, we have a lot of interesting systems and technologies below that. I wouldn't say we're doing anything bleeding edge, but everything, we're doing a lot of stuff to make the room really flexible, because you have to be flexible in an orchestra hall. Our main gig is to hear the orchestra in there, but also the ability to do a corporate or to do a film or to do Noel in there, or something like that. So there's a lot of ties between our Digico network, which is also what we use at the Shell, which is our live sound consoles and preamps and stuff like that. And that's kind of how we route all of the signals to the speakers. That whole network is also interfaced completely with our recording network, so that if we wanted to do anything that we have amplification for kind of virtual or record it, it's easy. It's a click of a button almost. And then there's a lot of kind of backbone stuff, because we have some ancillary spaces in here, like the multi-purpose room, which is kind of right by the recording studio. So that room can kind of play, either play into the concert hall or be connected to it or be separated from it. So there's a lot of interesting technologies that we've used to kind of interface that stuff, but also keep it separate if they need to be.
Thank you, Joel. It's really exciting. And we know that this is, historically, we've had rentals of the hall from different genres of music, and we anticipate that too. So this makes it a highly desirable place to come and present a wide range of music, in addition to the core of our programming, which is the San Diego Symphony Orchestra. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Travis, turning to you, the I know you're really excited about sound, and you're also really excited about what we're going to be able to see, and the lighting of the hall itself. And what you and I value, as do the architects HGA, is the historic nature of this hall, which has been seen to some, but not all of it is seen to all, just because it is in relative darkness. And we are going to shed a light. So can you talk about that?
I can, absolutely. And to take us back and remind us, I think, of what the room looked like before the renovations. In general, in terms of lighting for the audience, so just talking about architectural lighting of the room currently, excluding the stage for a moment. We all might remember that we had, the beautiful chandeliers and some downlight on the audience, and that was essentially it. So we weren't putting any architectural lighting on the walls, very limited lighting on the ceiling itself. It was mainly just downlight, and in addition to that, we had very dark, heavy features in terms of the red seats in the hall, the deep red valance that was over the proscenium arch. And so the room in general, the walls, everything just sort of read as beige. It just sort of disappeared into the background. And what we found, even through construction now, having these big construction lights highlighting the architecture, when you walk in the space now, you realize that there was so much color in the hall that we just lost before because it wasn't lit well. And there's, these beautiful blues and greens and even some maroons and burgundies in the ceiling that just you weren't able to appreciate that before because it wasn't lit as well. I mentioned the chandeliers. Those are being refurbished. So they're out of the hall currently, but they're coming back. We're resetting all of the stained glass in those beautiful fixtures and converting everything in the hall, both architectural and stage lighting, to LED fixtures. So they'll be much more efficient as well. In addition to that, all surrounding the room, all of the walls will now have wall washers. So light raking up the walls, and the beautiful ornate plasterwork that exists in front of the organ and all around the proscenium arch, that will have light incorporated into it at different levels of those balconies and decorative features, so that we're really able to see and appreciate the architecture now.
And it's all very discrete lighting. In other words, one reason we couldn't do it before is you would have had to run cables and wires and in places where it wasn't easily done. And now when I go down there and see all of the conduit and the discrete way of hiding things, so the effect of the lighting is seen without the fixture being seen.
That's correct. Yes, all of those fixtures will be integrated into the architecture now, so that you're not seeing the fixtures or the cabling, as you say. For both lighting and audio, we've been very careful to put cable passes and conduit where we need to, so you shouldn't be seeing any of those cables hanging everywhere. It should be a much neater look with the production elements in the room.
So you will remember that we went to Escondido on a Sunday. You all took over the stage for much of the day. I came at the end, but there were a couple of things we were looking at, including stage lighting fixtures and which ones could fit between the sound panels, and then the lighting effects on the mesh. Could you describe that whole process? Because lighting was at a critical part of that.
Absolutely, yes. I'll point out one of the things you just mentioned, which is a key part of the design, are I think there's 25 separate acoustic reflector panels that are over the stage. And those are tunable in terms of the natural acoustic in the room. So those panels can tip up, down, left, and right, and provide a lot of adjustment for what the orchestra is hearing on stage in terms of being able to hear themselves There are other players across the stage. And also what's being sent out into the house, as we call it, into the chamber itself, the seating area of the room. And that creates a really unique perspective for the lighting, because we have these sort of diamond-shaped spaces between each of those panels that we are coming through the ceiling with lighting to be able to light the stage for our musicians. And those are creating what we're calling lighting pods. So each of those can be adjusted individually to come through the ceiling. And we're making the most of that space the limited space that we have in those ceilings by putting very advanced light fixtures in those locations. So these they're elation lighting fixtures is the maker of the lighting fixture, and we've worked really closely with them to ensure that these big professional looking moving lights, they can pan tilt and serve many functions, because it allows us not to have to focus one plot that's static forever, but it allows us to, with the push of a button, refocus a light for any performance, which makes the venue much more usable, much more flexible in terms of lighting. And then we can also pick up, for something more theatrical, pipe or truss as well from those pods to be able to do more of a traditional plot. But we worked hand in hand with Elation to ensure that these big, powerful fixtures are also completely silent, which is something that's really unique to, lighting an orchestral space where the acoustic in the room is so important and silence is so important, so that we can hear only, what's coming from our musicians. So just like we've made huge advances in all of the mechanical equipment to make sure that's absolutely silent in terms of the HVAC systems, we worked very carefully to ensure that the lighting was completely silent, because modern LED fixtures often have fans and things like that. So we've worked with Elation to make sure that these instruments have what we call mute mode, which for an orchestral performance turns off all of those fans and any of the ambient noise related to the lighting.
That is critical, as we know. The lighting on the mesh and the color of the mesh.
Thank you. Yes, and the mesh is the decorative metal surface that you'll see surrounding the stage and the rear wall of the floor level and balcony level seating areas. They create the tuning chambers that we've been talking about. So this decorative metal is acoustically transparent, and then the reflective or absorptive surfaces, depending on the type of performance, live behind that decorative surface. And we have lighting all the way around those mesh panels to be able to up like that and provide a really warm ambience around the room and allow you to appreciate that architecture, just like we're lighting the plaster walls as well.
We've spent a lot of time talking internally and looking at the placement of lighting, and it's tricky because, as Travis says, there's not endless room to provide it. It's really important you have the best lighting for the musicians for the notes on the page. Lighting the front of the stage, can you talk about the challenges there in terms of the musicians as well?
I can, yes. We have what's referred to as a permanent apron, a part of the stage that comes out in front of the traditional proscenium, which would be the edge of the original stage in the space. And now, tailoring this to be a true concert hall, we're coming out in front of that proscenium with the orchestra. And that creates some challenges with the architecture of the proscenium itself, that decorative plaster arch that is over the orchestra. And being able to light that space specifically, was always a bit of a challenge because we didn't have any lighting infrastructure that was above that area. One of the things that we've done that will improve both lighting and safety is we're putting in a whole, what we call a 4-stage grid, so a working surface for the crew that the audience won't see. It's above the plaster ceiling, but it allows the crew to walk out onto that space and to be able to rig lighting fixtures or hang microphones in the case of audio. And we're adding 2 additional lighting pipes that will be over the house, or can be over the house, that will hang for specific performances when we need something more theatrical, like Noel Noel, when we really want to take advantage of all of the theatrical lighting that we can do. We'll be able to hang additional pipes in front of the stage to be able to help with that lighting.
So I think our target was 25 minutes and we're already past 35. However, there are some questions in the chat that I want to cover. It's so interesting, you know, we don't plan for these, the questions always bubble up. So one of the questions I actually intended to ask earlier, which is, when we look at those the speaker arrays, are they going to be there for concerts in which the orchestra is playing alone, in which there's no amplification?
And no, the answer is that they're not needed, and they block the view, they block the sound. So we'll take those large ones down. An interesting aspect of this, like that Travis kind of talked about, is that we're going to have something that they call a voice system. So there's speakers integrated into the architecture that if we had like a pre-concert lecture, or someone's going to talk at the top of the concert, we could still amplify that into the house, but it'll be basically totally invisible to the audience.
And the next question is tied to that. You just talked about the architecture of the hall. So are there any particular challenges you've encountered or anticipate while integrating the new audio technology while maintaining the hall's historical aesthetic and acoustic integrity? That's a very good question.
Yeah, I think this is where HGA really shines. Kind of what our consultants have done and everything is that, I might say we need to be able to do this and like all of these knobs and aspects of technology. And what they do is they fit it into the actual hall. So for example, we're going to do a lot of hanging mics for our live concerts because they're kind of the least intrusive. And so what they've done is they've strategically placed the holes for me to basically put microphones to where I need to get them, because we need to get them within 3 inches of where we want them, but also to have it not look like Swiss cheese upstairs and kind of have it work with the architecture. So there's really interesting stuff that they've been able to do and capture that integrity.
Thank you. Travis, how is the renovation project incorporating energy efficient lighting solutions in the concert hall? And what are the anticipated benefits in terms of sustainability and cost savings?
Yeah, great question. As I mentioned, for the architectural lighting, but both for the stage lighting, we're converting everything to LED fixtures, which will have a great energy savings. It's hard for us to quantify what the cost savings will be at this point. We're looking forward to finding that out because we do anticipate that it will be significant. But the fact that we're also combining that with very efficient mechanical systems comparatively to what we had before the renovation in terms of heating and air conditioning, water heater, new boiler, things like that, all of which will be much more efficient than what we had previously. So it's hard to put a dollar amount to it that we anticipate at this point, but we expect it to be significant.
And you mentioned earlier converting those chandeliers to LED, and some people have memories of LED when it first emerged, but can you talk about the quality of the light?
I can, yes. And LED lighting has come a long way, especially LED stage lighting in the last few years, where many fixtures used to just be RGB, red, green, blue, color mixing. There's now many different color chips that exist in stage lighting fixtures that provide what we refer to as the amber effect. So a traditional light, when it dims, takes on more of an amber color. And so now we're able to completely replicate that with LED lighting. So it feels very natural when these lights dim all the way down to zero. Early LED lighting also used to have a drop off when you got down to about 10%. It was either 10% or off. And you could see, when you would dim audience lighting, you would see a drop off in some venues that had the early LED fixtures when the technology was first introduced. But all of that has been remedied, and now all of the lighting will feel very natural. But we'll save a lot of time. We used to, once a year, all the chandeliers would get dropped. It would take about 3 days to change the hundreds of light bulbs that used to surround those fixtures. So we're really looking forward to the new LED fixtures and the chandeliers.
And it's going to be beautiful.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us today. This, along with all of our other broadcasts of our excitement about the opening of taking you inside Jacobs Music Center video series, will be on our website. And so if you've missed one of the earlier ones, you can go back, or you can send a link to a friend that you think would be interested. We are all so excited, and I can tell you, you've seen a little bit of the fly-through of the site today. So you can see it's a very busy construction site with a lot going on, and every time we go in there, something new has emerged. So it's great. We can't wait to welcome you back indoors. I can't tell you how excited the orchestra is to be able to walk into their new home. And of course, essentially, we can't wait to hear them in their new home. That is going to be a momentous day. We will be doing a few more of these probably later in the summer as we build the excitement toward the opening. And so stay tuned for announcements of that. And our subscription series 23-24 is available on our website, sandiegosymphony.org. So if you haven't gotten your tickets for next season, there's still plenty of opportunity. We have several months yet to go. So please tell your neighbors, your friends, your family, and we can't wait to see you there. In the meantime, obviously, our summer season opens on June 30th with Rafael Paiari conducting the San Diego Symphony Orchestra again. And we will see you indoors. And before that, we'll see you outdoors. Thanks so much for joining us today, and enjoy the presentation.